I am unashamed. What about you?
Well, in our current status in these United States of America, there's a little bit of wrangling over the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who served on the Supreme Court for about 27 years, I think it was. I've just observed, I read what all the founding fathers had to say about the Constitution, about mankind, about a country, about a country's laws. James Madison, pretty well the architect of the Constitution, wrote it all down. People were there to advise and all that. So James Madison, speaking on behalf of the group, the men of that day in positions of power, political power in these United States of America, which were they're laying the groundwork for it. John Adams, after reading the Constitution, he said, this Constitution was written for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for any other. Well, 200 years later, through that passage of time, if you read text in the Bible, I think Madison was very aware of Romans 15. Everything in the past was written for our learning. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, and like all Scripture is God-breathed, it's useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, doing what's right, so that the man of God or woman could be thoroughly equipped for every good work. In lieu of all that, some approach the Constitution to this day and they look at the document and they say, well, during the time frame of the late 1700s, the application might have made a lot of sense. But 200 years later, the mores of the society has changed. There's only one lawgiver and one judge, the one who can save and destroy. So a human being comes along and says, let's stand on that let's be aware of the God of heaven. They prayed before the Constitution was written and came forth. They were men of prayer, sinful human beings, trying to lay a bedrock for a free society. So some 200 years later look at that and say, I'm a strict constitutionalist. If that's what it says, that's what it says. These guys did all the debate 240-something years ago. They debated it all out, and they say, here's the document. It produced the greatest nation on earth. Any way you want to slice it. That Constitution being the bedrock of the great, as it turned out, the greatest nation on earth. So some come along, and starting about 50 years ago in the 60s, people started stepping up and say, well, you just can't go word for word, verbatim, First Amendment, Second Amendment, the Bill of Rights. You can't just hold to what they said because life is ever evolving.
The times have changed.
Times have changed. So, I know God said don't murder, and the Constitution covers that. So when you really get to looking at it, in my humble opinion, for the ones who have served on the Supreme Court over the last 60, 70 years since I've been on the earth, all I can say is there's a vast difference between the Supreme Court and the Supreme Being.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
So you look at what both say, and you're like, I mean, if you sanctioned murder of your children in the womb, if you sanction perversion.
Well, I think it's
I'm just looking at it and saying, It's not based on the truth.
No. Well, there's a civics 101 lesson is that the judicial branch is there to interpret the law, not legislate the law. So there are parameters in place. If you want to pass a law, if you want to ratify the Constitution, there's a way to do that. You do it through the legislative branch. That's who legislates. That's who passes legislation. The executive branch executes the law, and the judicial branch, they interpret the law. I think what's up for debate here, and kind of just to simplify where we're at with the next Supreme Court nomination, there's two basic veins or two veins of thought that are competing with one another. One is the strict originalist, which basically means that you read this same thing on, by the way, with how we talk about the Bible. You read, your hermeneutic is you read it as it was intended, and then that's their only job. Even if they disagree with it, it doesn't matter. They could totally disagree with it, but you have to read the law as it was intended to be written. You're not legislating from the bench. I'm just reading it for what it says, and then I'm going to tell you, oh yeah, this is what it says. And the other side is saying that we can change the interpretation based on society. Well, you can't change the interpretation. You can change the law. You can vote people in office who will change the law to whatever you want. And like to your point, or James Madison's point, our system will not work for a society that has abdicated any allegiance to the truth. So that's why when James Madison said it's wholly inadequate for any, what was the quote? Wholly inadequate for non-religious or immoral people.
Yeah.
Any other.
Yeah.
What was the quote?
Which one are you talking about?
The James Madison quote that our
Oh,
Constitution.
yeah. John Adams said the Constitution was written after he read it.
Yeah.
He said, for a religious and moral people, it's wholly inadequate for any other. The problem is the any others.
Yeah.
They've been rather prolific in the last 50 or 60 years. So you say the any other, they're trying to be basically saying you can be good without God or what he had to say when he gave the law.
But the reason why it's inadequate is because if you have to have a standard of truth that is not determined by us. Because if truth is determined by us, the people, or a group of 9 judges on the Supreme Court, or even the President of the United States, or if we determine the truth for ourselves, and as opposed to discovering it by revelation from God, then the question becomes, which one of us gets to determine it? And it's the one that's got power.
And there's the rub.
What happens from my simplistic brain, because y'all seem to be, going into the deep water, but I look at it like, just like the Bible people do, our leaders do with the Constitution. They come up with what they think is truth, and then they go to the Bible or they go to the Constitution and they try to change it to fit their belief system.
Yep.
And especially with the Bible, which is what I'm into more because I read it all the time, you see it all the time. Someone has an idea that they think this is the way society should be, or this is the way this needs to happen. And then it's weird how once you have your mind made up on what you think the truth is, you can pretty much find any support in the Bible. I've had people argue the exact opposite of what the Bible clearly says, even on, all kind of moral issues. But they're just trying to make it fit and work because they believe what truth is. So that's why all of a sudden they're like, well, this didn't mean this 240 years ago when it comes to Constitution. That should be changed. They were wrong about that. That all started from an idea that someone had that they deemed as truth.
Yeah, you can make the text fit whatever you want it to say.
That's right.
We have the word of the prophets, 2 Peter 1:19, made more certain, and you will do well to pay attention to it. That includes the giving of the law of Moses and all of that. as to a light shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. Above all, you must understand and get this on straight, that no prophecy of Scripture, the document I'm reading from, no prophecy of Scripture came about by the prophet's own interpretation, which goes to the Supreme Court. For prophecy never had its origin in the will of man, ever. But men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. I'm going to stand on that. And when I read this, to me, this Bible is the final word. It speaks of where it all came from, the cosmos, where we came from, what we're doing here, what should we do, and is there a way out of here? To use Jase's terminology, it's all here.
Yeah.
And you read the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, irregardless of the law system. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. When you read those things, you say, that would be a great culture based on the Word of God. It would be a terrific culture to go in there and start when it says, do not murder. Jesus said, or you'll be subject to judgment. Jesus said, I tell you that anybody who hates his fellow man is subject to judgment.
Yeah, because it comes down to the heart. But you think even about how that got started, look, on abortion, they, as in people who came up with this narrative, they said, well, because most people, you look at a little baby and you're looking at a woman's belly, you make the connection that the baby was a baby before and after, most people. But what happens is you say, well, but I believe it should be a woman's choice. So that's their fundamental argument, which they're admitting the ability to choose, which we believe is a God-given ability. So they're taking a God-given ability, from my view, and then they took an exception to the norm, which is what happens if a woman is raped? Well, what do then, I mean, she didn't even cause this to try to fit a narrative of, well, it's a woman's right to choose, so it's really not, and it's not a baby till it comes out. It's just part of her tissue. So what I'm saying is they had an idea, and then they start trying to make an argument based on one difficult, because it is difficult when a woman gets raped. We have a difficult situation here. Of course, us as believers, we know that God, it's not that he just produces life, he is life.
Let's take a quick break on that one.
I was doing an event the other night. A person came up and said, I want to thank you so much for the podcast. I was like, awesome. We're sharing Jesus. And she said, well, yeah, but you introduced me to Black Rifle Coffee. I just wanted to thank you for that. It's like, whoa.
It's good coffee. I don't know if it's as good as
That's
Jesus,
what I
though.
thought, but hey, they liked it. It's good.
But you guys, because you guys, I mentioned this last time. Yeah, y'all are very particular about your coffee.
You think?
I mean, that's been a. In fact, the first In the Woods with Phil episode we did was, I think, you drinking, how to make a cup of coffee. So you've been doing this. You've been at this a long time. Black Rifle Coffee Company, one of our sponsors. You guys got to check them out. Get the freshest coffee in America, and you don't even have to leave your couch. So go to blackriflecoffee.com/Phil and use our promo code Phil. And you get 20% off your first purchase. That's 20% off your purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/Phil. Use the promo code Phil.
We're always going to choose life, but they're not checking with this. So they're trying to change the Constitution. They're trying to change because and even in the Declaration of Independence, that is part of, we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, to live.
One lawgiver,
So,
one judge.
It seems to, when I'm looking at it, the Constitution is lining up with the Bible, which was your original point. And so other people are getting together and say, what could we do to change that? I know. Let's take the most difficult situation we know of and try to change the whole thing. That's how it happens. That's what I'm saying. You have a narrative in your mind and you play a little game. You try to get talking points where you can get people on board. And the bottom line is anything that ends in death, especially of something innocent, and in my opinion, made in the image of God, you took a wrong turn.
And the slaughter continues.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, vast difference between men and women on the Supreme Court in some earthly kingdom and the Almighty God in heaven. Vast difference.
To your point on the Declaration of Independence, I think it's very interesting because you got Thomas Jefferson who wrote that line that you mentioned, and he was influenced by a philosopher named John Locke, who also, so you got Locke kind of as the guy who influences Jefferson in the American Revolution, but he influences another philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in the French Revolution, and that didn't end up the same as the American Revolution. It ended up with chaos and tyranny and the guillotines. I think we've talked about that on here before. But the reason is that, as Phil said, you have to have a I want to use the word arbitrary, or a non-movable, there has to be an anchor upon which you build everything. Yeah. And Jefferson, now, I don't know if Jefferson was a believer. I wouldn't make that case for sure, but he at least pragmatically understood that if we're going to build a system,
and a society,
yeah, we need to understand a couple things. One, we need to understand that man is very sinful and capable of all sorts of evil.
All men.
Lord Acton said that, you guys have probably heard this quote, that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the idea is when we concentrate power in its purest form, I don't care who it is. I couldn't handle it. You couldn't handle that kind of power. Why? We're sinful. So the goal is to take power and build a system and a society that has checks and balances. And the Supreme Court, when it was established with the idea that man is wicked and will hurt you. And we don't want to we don't want to let any man ever get that powerful. The other side of the argument believes that man is perfectible, and so, oh no, we're all good, and we can actually be perfect. And if we get the right elites in the right place, then they're smart enough to determine for the rest of us how we're going to run our society. What we're saying is that doesn't line up with the Scripture, that all men are sinful. Romans chapter 3 is pretty clear about the state of man. I mean, it's not good, and so when we come to the discussion right now, I mean, just think about it. Do we really believe, this is what I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, her legacy will be. Scalia watched an interview with Napolitano on Fox, and he before Scalia died, he said that Scalia told him that she would have a bigger legacy than even Scalia because of how she's moved the court. She was an activist. And essentially what she was saying is that and anyone who would support that is that they're smart enough and brilliant enough and gifted enough and talented enough and wise enough, these 9 people, that they can overturn the will of the American people, that they're smarter than the collective will of us. And we just don't believe
their
it.
edicts trump God's.
It does, and so when you get to the concept of truth, which is we're in John 14. If we ever get to that, I mean, I love the fact that we're in John 14 at the same time that we're talking about the Supreme Court, because this is about truth. Ultimately, here's the battle: who gets to determine truth? Do we determine it, or do we discover it? Is it revealed by God? And John 14 is this great text because Jesus in John 13. It's he's basically saying, I'm about to head to the cross, I'm leaving. And you can imagine if you've been walking with him for this time period, how devastated you might be.
But look, let me jump in. Even that in that conversation, when he said, right after when Jesus said in 13, let's see, where am I at? 13:36, he says, right after he talked about love, he says, Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Which they had no idea what he was talking about. We get it.
Yeah.
But we know he's dying, he's going to be, and he's going to come back to life, but he's going to go be with the Father.
But we're looking at it after he did it.
Well, right.
They're there before he did it.
Yeah, they're like, what are you talking about?
But I love this, and we didn't bring this up last time, but Peter said, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Now, which sounds great, but Jesus replied, will you really lay down your life for me? Now, there's a question mark there, and then the next phrase, I tell you the truth, which is implying you're lying. Because trust me, before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. It so reminds me of that movie that came out, which is what Hollywood does. They take a biblical principle, and we don't notice it. I mean, I'm looking for it, so I'm picking this stuff out. And they say, I can hear them at the Hollywood production meeting and say, like, look, let's get a funny guy, and let's make it where he can't lie. And so then everywhere he goes, he just has to tell the truth. And it'll be hilarious because no one does that in our society. Y'all remember the movie? I don't know what it's called.
Yeah,
I think
it's called,
Liar, baby.
Yeah, Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And so he goes to the office and like, you've got drunk last night. You're
fat.
You're fat. Everything he had. It was actually funny. But you sit and chuckle and you think, well, here's Jesus. There was actually a person that was like that. That is that. Of course, if you told the same people who made the movie, they're like, no, that's absurd. It's a comedy. Nobody could have the ability. So when Peter said, I'll lay down my life for you. Well, it was no, you won't. You're lying. I tell you the truth. So that's the prerequisite for what happens. So he gets to 14, he says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. We've read this over and over. But I think when you see where the conversation started with this, I'm incapable of lying. For real. So then he says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. I mean, this is a person who cannot lie. So right there, you've seen him do his miracles. You should be on the edge of your seat saying, whatever he says, I'm doing. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. He can't lie. This should be comforting. You know the way to the place where I'm going. So then, what I believe, Thomas represents every religious group in the world when he makes this statement. He says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Because you think about all the denominations in our world. They're all trying to find the way to the Lord. You say, what is the difference in that church on one street corner and the church right across? They got different paths, which is disturbing. Now, they'll say they don't. Oh, no, we're all... But then if you get out in the parking lot and you start asking how you're getting there and how you're getting there, an argument will develop. Because they're like, well, I'm not getting there that way. That's why I'm over here. And watch what he says, which is the bedrock for what we're talking about. Jesus answered. So he asked, where are you going? How can we know the way? And Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. The 3 things we just talked about you say, what does the Supreme Court have to do with what we're talking about? And he basically talked about the way off the planet, the truth while you're on it, and the life. Because if you don't have life, what's your alternative?
Yeah, let's take a break.
I mean, one of the biggest problems now that till season has started is I keep getting I get debris stuck in my hair. And it's frustrating because I have to cut it out. The positive of that is that I have hair which stuff is getting stuck in.
That's true. Well, if you don't have hair, we're at it again with our sponsor Keeps. I bet you this, because these guys have been sponsoring us for a while. I bet you the Unashamed Nation men have the best hair of any other people group out there. I guarantee you. I bet our audience has the best hair out there. If you've noticed your hair isn't looking as full as it used to and you're losing a little bit of hair, go to keeps.com/door and you will get 50% off your first order of Keeps hair loss treatments. That's Keeps, KEEPS.com/door, 50% off your first order. That is keeps.com/door. Keeps.com/door. That's incredible because we skipped over verse 3 a little bit, but think about what Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. You mentioned that the number one question of the religious people is, what is the way to the Lord? I would probably change that a little bit. I think the number one question is, what they're asking is, what is the way to heaven? And what they're missing is that heaven is not a place. Heaven is a person, because this is what Jesus says. He says, I will come again and receive you to myself. So I'm going to take you to myself.
Look, you know how I know you're right? Which is my point. When I've heard sermons given on this, they talk about the place. They talk about heaven and the rooms, and they're describing heaven. They go to Revelation, and there's jewelry, and there's... Yeah, and I'm like, you missed it. If you read this section again and focus on I and my, watch what you find. He says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. And you want to talk about the place? The house? I think the point was I.
So, to make your point, when the Hebrew writer got down to a critical thing about telling the truth and lying and what God said he's going to do for the human race, because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose, which was what Jesus was doing with Peter and them, very clear to the heirs of what was promised. You know, what's the way? How we're going to get out of here? What are you going to... He confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it's impossible for God to lie, he said, I have spoken and I have said that I will get you off planet Earth alive. And here's the good news. I can't lie. It's going to happen. Yeah. So what? We who have fled, two impossible things for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope offered us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. So basically he says, let me tell you something one more time. I will give you immortality, and the great news is I can't lie. So that means, it's going to happen. I like that.
And the immortality is being in the presence of Christ. So like the question, what is heaven? Heaven is being in the presence of Christ.
Well, would it matter to you if you were in a shack with Jesus for eternity?
You won't care.
You wouldn't care.
It's his presence that
Look, when you're
reward.
taking a trip, now just think about this practically. I've had this argument many times. So we're taking a trip. What's the first question?
Where are we going?
Where are we going? Well, that ain't my question.
What's your question?
I'm like, who's going? If the right people are going, guess what?
You don't care where you're going.
I'm in.
Well, I guess I'm the typical religious person. I'm asking.
You fell for it. It was a trap. They said, where are we going? I don't care. My wife's going. I'm in. Where are we going? Then that's my second question. But I believe that in Jesus, that was his point here. That's why he said, I, me, I. He gave him all the clues. Then he said, well, we don't know the way. He's like, hey, you idiot. Well, he didn't say idiot, but he's like, I'm the way. I'm the truth. I'm the light. You know me, which was his point, was it not?
Yeah.
It wasn't about the description of the place.
No.
That's why later, he says, we're God's building. He makes all these things that doesn't make sense. Well, how are we God's building? Which I, make the argument about God doesn't live in buildings. Yeah, he lives in people. He lives with people. So my whole point is, number one, I guess 2 points. Number one is when it comes to voting, I mean, I've said many times, I stay out of politics because it just seems slimy. But, the other night I got invited to introduce Don Trump Jr. because they were doing a fundraiser here in North Louisiana. And so, and you, I think, asked me if I was interested. I don't know who asked you or whatever, and I was like, I have zero interest. I think my exact quote is, I have zero interest in this. And then I said, if Don wants me to come, he'll send me a text. You were like, oh, he has your number? I'm like, yeah, we're friends. And so the next morning, I'm like, I took care of that. I'm in duck blind. Well, and I think I kind of chastised you because I was like, look, that's fake news probably. Somebody just saying, oh, Don Trump Jr., he's not coming to Shreveport. That's what I was
I just
thinking.
pass along the invitations.
Yeah. So I'm in the duck blind. It's like 5:45. My phone goes off. I'm like, ain't but a couple people in the world that I know of would be texting me at 5:45, But I look, it's Don Trump Jr. He's like, hey, I hear I'm seeing you tomorrow night. And I'm like, oh, I guess this is legit. And so my point is, you have an election coming up, and you have, even though I'm not into politics, I'm going to vote for the person who more is in line with what we just read. Whoever is going to support the way, the truth, and the life, that's where I'm going to vote. So here I know the Trumps, but I knew them before they were running for president. So you thought, what are you going to say? So I go to this thing. I just say what happened. I was like, it's interesting how I met the Trumps. I walked into their hotel, New York City. I thought, boy, good times have come our way. And I think the line I said is, because they gave me 10 minutes before I introduced him. I said, 10 minutes. I said, that's about how long it took for me to get escorted out one of the Trump hotels, looking like I do. Within 10 minutes, they said, get him out of here. And they did it respectfully and professionally. And I didn't even blame them. I took up for the guy who escorted me out. So then I said, so when it came to President Trump saying he's going to build a wall, I knew he's going to build that wall. Because everybody was looking befuddled like, what do you mean? I said, because when they saw a threat to their hotel, they put a wall in between them and me immediately. And I thought, Garen, they're concerned about security, which I like.
Yeah.
And so then I said that they sent me an email after it kind of went viral because I thought it was funny. And I didn't know this whole episode with Oprah had happened where she got offended because she was at a store and she was going to, it was pricey. And the person working there said, I don't think you can afford that, because she wanted to look at something. She didn't know
like a Pretty Woman moment.
Yeah, she didn't
Big
know.
mistake.
Huge. Well, Oprah got mad. It was just like, racial profiling. Of course, I'm sitting here. I got facially profiled, and I didn't think it was a big deal because I thought, no, the guy thought I was, a vagrant, and I don't blame him. I mean, I'm pretty unkept. So they said, well, next time you're up here, we want to take care of you. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew who the Trumps were, and I thought, I will see what that meant. So when I went back...
Take care of me.
Yeah. I sent him an email, and I said, I'm coming back. We were doing whatever. And he's like, meet me at wherever, some golf course in New Jersey. And so we went out, played golf. They didn't play with... I think Willie. It was Willie and me. But when we come back, they said, let's have lunch. He said, we want to, talk about a few things. So
let's break real quick. Hear the rest of the story. So you're happy with your cell phone plan right now? in your carrier?
Cell phone free zone.
So Phil has a cell phone free zone, so he's perfectly happy with his carrier.
I don't know how many are out there, but everyone I ask to the person, 100%, when I say, I don't have a cell phone, I never clicked onto the computer, what am I missing?
Yeah.
Every one of them say,
They say nothing.
you're missing nothing.
Well, I have to have a cell phone or I wouldn't be able to operate the business, but and you wouldn't be able to trade your stocks, right?
Well, they wouldn't
You
be
have to
hearing
have a
what we're
cell
saying
phone,
right now.
and
That's true. So
in modern society, Phil, the cell phone is here, and it's going to stay.
I'm not fighting it. I'm just deciding.
yeah.
not
So
to
if you're
fool it.
if you're going to get a cell phone, you might as well go ahead and go to patriotmobile.com/Phil. That's patriotmobile.com/Phil and get a free activation plus a special gift with our offer code, and our offer code is Phil. Or you can call the U.S.-based customer service team. Well, that's nice, a U.S.-based customer service team.
Yeah,
And
this is.
I don't have one, but I don't care. I'm happy for you if you do have one.
This is for your imagination. Imagine if you had a phone. This group, they're going to take the money that you give them for the phone, and they're going to send it to things that you would enjoy.
But knowing no one can contact me is a blessing.
Yeah, maybe
So it's all in your brain. This is just imagine.
Just imagine this. Yeah. So if you want to call the U.S. based customer service team, that's 972 Patriot, 972 Patriot, or again you could go to patriotmobile.com/Phil.
So I thought, what are the Trumps going to talk about? I thought you would think, well, maybe they're talking about their dad's going to run for president, or how we can go in business together or whatever. What we talked about was how to help kids with craniofacial issues. Because when they researched who they had escorted out, they said, good grief, they have a charity, and they're the biggest donors I know of kids with that condition. And we spent the entire hour talking about that. Well, that impressed me, because I thought of all the things we could have talked about, the last thing I thought we were going to talk about is helping kids. So we got to be friends. And then the next time I saw them was when their dad was running for president. Phil endorsed another candidate.
You
did
that, Phil?
Yeah, and Don Jr. sends me a text and says, "What's up with your dad?" And I said, "Hey, he's his own man." He said, "Well, I'll be there tomorrow. Or is it duck season, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He said, "Will you care if I go hunting with you?" I was like, "I don't care. It's a memory." He showed up to take 3 days. And Phil was pretty impressed with him.
Yeah.
He's one of the best shotgun shots I've known.
Yep.
So anyway, back to my story, because I'm rambling. But I got up there and said, look, I stay out of politics, but I'm friends with Don Jr. And the reason I think people are uncomfortable when his dad speaks and says whatever he's thinking at times, I said, I don't believe they're politicians. They were business people who said, we want to help America, and I believe their heart's right. And I said, I'll tell you this, and this is the statement where the crowd got up and cheered. I said, I believe they're sent from God. Now, a lot of people probably just fell off their chair. It's like, what are you talking about? How can you say that? Because I thought about that quote that Jesus said where he said, wisdom is proved right by our actions. Because Jesus in Matthew 11, had a reputation for being a glutton and a drunkard. We all know that's not true. They attacked him because they were scared of him. And so he made that statement. When I look at President Trump's actions, he's done more for people of faith in his decision-making process than any other president in the history of our nation.
That's correct.
So I'm like, that's what I'm going with. That's what I'm here for. And then I did a little illustration. I said, look, the reason it's so difficult and the reason everybody's so open up in arms, and I'm not defending every little thing. I'm just going by that because I vote based on God's qualities being helped. Anything that's going to revolve around the truth, the way, Jesus, the life, that's what in life. I'm going to vote for that. So I made a practical analogy about, I said, I'm one of the few people in here, probably maybe the only person Of course, the swamp people were there too, so maybe they've seen it. But I said, I've actually seen what happens when a swamp is drained. I said, it's stinky. There's snakes everywhere, all kind of predators. And I said, then the buzzards gather. It's not a pleasant place. I said, so all this turmoil you see and toward the president and toward him leaning toward people of faith, I was like, that these are the kind of things that happen. I would call that
Yeah,
normal.
when all that was going on, I was behind Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, simply because he was a strict constitutionalist.
Well,
So I was-
he's on the short list. I think Trump's going to appoint a woman, but Cruz is on the short list.
But when Trump axed him,
yeah,
well, then it got down to Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. And I'm like, well, I mean, I said, somebody said he's some kind of New York businessman. I didn't know anything about Donald Trump. I'd seen him from time to time on, on the news reels, whatever. But I thought, well, if he's going up against Hillary Clinton, I can't vote for her for sure. I said, well, I guess I'm a Trump man.
Because the principles are not lining up with the truth.
That is correct.
I think as kingdom people, though, I do think that we have to make sure that what we're not saying is that Donald Trump is the answer. We believe Jesus is the answer. There's flawed men, so I think that. Yeah. And I do think I think that there's going to be a unique opportunity. That's why I focus more on kind of the idea of what this is, and I look at it as there's two warring factions. God uses people who don't even understand that.
Oh, I agree. Look, Zach, I've often told people, because it offends people when I say I'm not in politics, and they're like, "Well, don't you vote?" Yeah, I vote every time. People go out there and gave their life so we would have the freedom to vote. I am standing in line or I'm mailing it in. I am voting. I'm all for voting.
Me too.
But you got to remember, it's like what Phil said. They're all flawed men. I've had many Christians come and say, how can you be friends with, I saw on Facebook you went hunting with Don Trump Jr. I mean, did you hear what his dad said? They were talking about the locker room talk, controversy or whatever. I'm like, well, yeah, it was horrible. Next question. I mean, I'm like, okay, do you remember when Biden was, when Obama got elected, he leaned in and you could hear, I mean, this is the first speech by Obama when he got elected.
Big effing deal.
Yeah, he leaned over there and said, this is a big effing deal. And I thought, why would you say that when you're out there right here where there are cameras around this? It was so offensive to me. However, I'm saying both cases are bad. Well, you got to vote for somebody. If you can pick out stuff like we're talking highly flawed individuals like we all are, so you have to have some basis to cast your vote. I'm always going to lean toward things that help, I think, the kingdom. Having said that, whoever's been the president for my entire life, I don't think I've really seen any major difference in my day-to-day life in the last 50 years. I mean, we all get bent out of shape. We all get passionate about it, but when it comes down trickling to my normal life, I hadn't seen a whole lot of difference, no matter who's the president.
Let's take a break.
Have y'all, or am I wrong?
Well, I think I think there has been a slow grind. I don't put
erosion.
Yeah, a slow erosion I think has happened over my lifespan. I'm 43. But I've kind of had a metamorphosis of my own. I do think that where we're at culturally right now, I don't really fit into either. I don't fit into the partisan game anymore. I ran for Congress. Y'all know that. I mean, I was 2010. I was all in, and I just think over the years and being so closely connected with some of the people who have ran some of these movements. I'm just keep coming back to who is God. I don't know.
Well, you realize that, which is what I told you. The solution to the problem is not the president.
Yeah, I just don't.
It's ultimately Jesus. But you love Jesus. You're a very smart guy, and I'm like, why spend your time talking about policy? I'd rather you spend it on Jesus, which is what you're doing. now.
But you need to have policy discussions and whatnot.
I agree.
Because
I agree.
and so this is where I struggle, because you look at like communism or Marxism, which is a political economic philosophy, and you look at the fact that it's responsible for 100 million people being murdered. And so ideas do have consequences, to quote the late R.C. Sproul's. But, so we look at this, we think we can't not just say, well, we're not going to discuss this. I'm just going to go strictly spiritual. And that's kind of a Gnostic view anyways of the world, which is an ancient heresy. I got to be involved. So it's this tension. This is where I'm at, this full disclosure. And so it's a tension of knowing that it matters. I think what I don't want to get into is where my politics becomes my identity as a Christian. My identity is a blood-covered believer.
Yeah.
And that's my identity. Now, I involve myself politically, but my hope is not in the Republican Party. If it was, then we're done. We're done for.
Yeah. I wanted to bring this up because we don't have really time to get deep into this. But before we did the podcast today, I was talking to y'all about in Acts 19, right after, a miracle happens, and it there makes a statement in 19:18. It says a number. Let's see. In Acts 19:18, it says, many of those who believed now came and openly confessed their sins, and a number who had practiced sorcery brought their scrolls together and burned them publicly because they had come to Jesus. And so in verse 23, about that time, there arose a great disturbance about the way. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because here you have spirit-filled men who are going from town to town, and they become known as the way because they're focusing on Jesus, who said, I am the way. And this leads to a riot because in that day, the people's belief system was in this temple of Artemis, where they were basically, it was an idol and they believed it was from heaven. And they had their narrative of how life should be led. And it wasn't about confessing sins and living for Jesus. And so they were threatening the disciples of Jesus, which, look, they all eventually were killed because of these types of situations. And I just thought to myself, here we are, couple thousand years later, the same stuff is going on. The reason we don't riot, if my guy doesn't win, I'm not going to riot because my hope's in Jesus. I say, you want to do something about it? Share Jesus and change the hearts of people. That's the way you're going to win the world. You want to change somebody's vote, change his heart. But if my guy don't win, I'm not going to riot. It's weird how on the other side, if the non-religious, the non-focus, the guy who's putting, more of his intensity in Jesus, if he don't win, what happens? I mean, if he wins, they riot. If he don't win, they're happy. But those are the two choices, which I think is disturbing, which shows you a lot right there. Mm-hmm. I mean, what happened when Trump got elected? Riots. Guess what? If he wins again, you know what's going to happen? People just... I remember seeing one video, which I don't even look at the internet, but I just remember somebody was just hollering, and they had zoomed up on it. It was like the funniest meme of all time.
Yeah,
it's just blood curdling scream. Which I don't really think there was I think they've been shocked at how he has embraced people of faith in his policy, but I've enjoyed it. I mean, I think great. I'll do it. I don't care how much baggage you got.
Yeah, we are in interesting times for sure. I mean, I just got through reading a book called what was the name of it? Revolt of the Public. And this guy who wrote this book was a CIA analyst, and he was predicting a lot of what's happening now in the CIA, and he was talking about kind of this protest. He calls it a culture of negation, that everybody's negating something. It's just like we're all just mad. We're just all ranting against something else, as opposed to having a progressive. I don't mean progressive liberal. I mean as a forward-thinking, positive. Here's where we're going. It's more like that's wrong. And
I think they do that because you're listening to human beings who have no hope beyond this life. They They don't know anything about the way.
Well, I would add they have no hope even in this life, and I think
That's right.
I think
But I think we should. I mean, look, isn't that interesting how they were known as the way? Why don't we just put on our church sign, the way?
The way
Is that not scriptural?
in the book of
Yeah.
Acts? We were called the way more than anything else.
And if you look at the context you just saw, it's a capital W, which tells you that. I mean, I think again, the truth. Jesus is the truth. He doesn't like come up with the truth. He is God is truth. God is love. God is the way. So everything is being personified.
It's hard to get the reason we say focus on Jesus. A lot of people, they say they're focused on Jesus, and then they focus on issues. Focusing on Jesus, when you start really seeing what that means, if it's incapable of him to lie, and you have all these red letters. So just think about, because when it all boils down to it, look, you said, what does this mean to our listeners? You got a guy here listening, just a normal fella, his wife's mad at him, whatever. Kids are off the rails. He lost his job because of coronavirus. He doesn't want to get to coronavirus. We got all this social unrest going on. You start looking around, you're like, I need some direction. Where could I go to find a place or a person who could give me some sound advice? What we're saying is focus on Jesus is you go to those red letters and you read over them and you see what he's like, and all of a sudden it'll make you smart for life because it helps all your decision-making processes. You just think about when it comes to sinful behavior. It wasn't like he didn't want you to have any fun. I mean, take sex. He's like, you can have all you want. Get married. Let the good times roll. Okay. But all these things that he seems to limit us, well, they're for our better. They're a better decision for your life.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about a sexually transmitted disease. That's never crossed my mind. Because I trusted God, and I was like, well, that saved me from a lot of, I'm not worried about getting the coronavirus and dying. Because I'm like, if God wants to heal me, he will. And if he don't, he'll raise me. I can't lose. So all of a sudden, guess what? Since I'm focused on the way, the truth, the light, I start making better decisions. And I think that's what it boils down to. To me, the Supreme Court justice, and if we can get somebody in who's more in line, even though they're supposed to just interpret the law, we know that's impossible because we're humans. Yeah. If you're interpreting it through the vein that you have a trust system that's based on this, I want you in there.
Me too.
Because I think this is right.
But it bothers me that that when they vet these nominees, that they have tried in the past to disqualify someone based on the fact, are they a Bible believing Christian? And I'm like, that's exactly the person that I want in the position, primarily because of what you said. We put somebody in there who has some materialistic worldview. I don't trust them. I don't trust anybody. And so I think
if
there's
Jesus is the truth, doesn't that in a way nullify all other little t truths?
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
That's why the way's capitalized.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.